If you're dreaming of owning your own land and building a homestead, freeing yourself from the matrix, the utility bills, the potential negative influences on your family from big urban areas, this might be the video for you. We spent 3 years, and really it started long before that in planning phase, but once we decided we were going to buy land, it took about 3 years to find it. And I thought, I should share some of my experiences and help you avoid some of the mistakes that we made. So in this video, we're going to get into the good and the bad, the ugly of raw land purchasing. I ran a poll right here on YouTube and asked you to answer this question. What's stopping you from locking down your homestead land right now? 57% said everything affordable is too far, too steep, or too rough. 23% said water rights, zoning, and access rules make it impossible. And 20% said no infrastructure, no power, no wells, no roads. Well, I experienced every single one of those problems. And so let me walk you through basically a checklist of things to keep an eye out for, a few warnings, a few caveats, some things that maybe you're not thinking of, and then how we address those in our own search. And maybe you can glean some things that'll help you in your raw land search. So let's get into it. Since 57% of those who voted in my poll said affordability was your biggest concern, let me address that right away. Yes, prices have skyrocketed, especially post-COVID. When everyone realized they could work from home, not everyone, but a lot of people could work from home, they realized they didn't need to be in the city paying astronomical prices and sitting in traffic all the time. So the whole farm homestead movement became really robust and prices shot up as this huge influx of people came into areas like the one that we're in. Fortunately, we bought pre-pandemic and were able to get this on a fire sale from a family that was, I believe, distressed and needed to get rid of the property. So we got 20 acres with water rights, an access road along the bottom of the property, and power along the other border for only $60,000. And today those are going for $300,000 to $400,000 for the same size lots. And water rights have gone from $6,000 or $7,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 per acre foot. I sympathize with the situation that's currently playing out around a lot of these little cities that are considered pretty cool. But you can go a little bit further out and find places that are affordable. I have another friend who did buy a little homestead not too far from here. It already had a home and a barn, water rights, and I think it's on 8 acres. And they got a pretty good deal on that home. So the deals are still out there. You just have to go maybe a little bit further out and start looking at cities that aren't booming. If the prices are just off the charts, then you have to look somewhere else. And again, part of the reason why it took us 3 years to find land was because everything was so expensive even then. And so we were just pouring through all of these different opportunities trying to find one that checked most of the boxes. One thing to consider right away, especially if you're on a tight budget, is do you have a construction or mechanical background, or are you just really handy with tools? Because almost every off-grid homesteader is able to build and maintain their own properties. So unless you're already very wealthy, you will not be successful hiring people to do everything for you. You're going to run out of money really fast. Also, if you're planning on growing food, you have to ask yourself whether or not you have any farming experience, not just a little bit of gardening around the house, but a little bit more robust farming and permaculture experience. And do you know how to raise animals? And are you mentally prepared to butcher your own meat when needed? And these are not small considerations. Post-COVID, there were so many people that were moving out and buying all these little 3 and 5 and 20 acre lots. And then they would start their homestead and then they would realize that they'd gotten way in over their head and that they were not mentally prepared for what they were undertaking. And they just waved the little white flag and they sold it and they moved back in closer to the city where they had, city water and power and grocery stores, because this is definitely not for everybody. And so it takes a certain type of person. So just keep that in mind. Off-grid homes live and die by proper drainage, row construction, slope management. And when we first started searching, we were not delusional. We were not chasing some fantasy where we thought we'd find a piece of land and build a cabin and plant a garden and suddenly we're living the dream. But even with our very realistic expectations, the shock came fairly fast. Now, we toured properties that looked absolutely incredible in the photos. Big views, privacy, trees, huge acreage. But in reality, there was either no access road, no water, no legal easement, no way to get concrete trucks or lumber deliveries or tradespeople without spending tens of thousands of dollars up front. They were just too remote and too rough to get out to. Some properties had illegal structures built on them. Others had neighbors whose nighttime activities made the land unusable. And one had a dumping ground just on the other side of the ridge with nonstop heavy equipment noise. So the lesson became clear. Ignore the pretty photos. You need to focus on the essentials. And for us, the must-haves were very straightforward. So number one was good, clear access roads that did not crisscross through the property. Now, even down on one of our lower lots here, we do have some easements where there's roads that go through and separate one little portion of our land from another part of it. And that's fine because we're not really going to use all of the land that we have down there. And those roads are there, and that's the way that everyone gets in and out of this general area. And we're okay with that. That's on the other side of our gate. And so, it's not ideal, but we are okay with that. But if you have an access road or an easement that goes right through the middle of your property, it's going to be very close to where you're going to build your home or where you want to plant your food. That may not be a very good idea. Ideally, you don't want any easements or the ability for anyone to come in there and build a road right through the middle of your land. Other properties had roads that were leading in, but they were in terrible condition and would have required full reconstruction to even be able to access the land and to bring vendors in. When you buy raw land, you're also buying the responsibility to either build or rebuild the access road, and complete with drainage, ditches and culverts and road base and gravel, tree removal and grading. So just really pay a lot of attention to how you get in there. Now, our access road coming in here wasn't the best, and we did end up going in and adding some road base and bar ditches and improving that road. And even some of the neighbors that were further down that have to drive on part of that road did chip in a little bit. But that was secondary to most of the construction that we did. It wasn't so bad that we couldn't get trucks and construction vehicles in here. So just keep that in mind. If it's passable and it's decent, fine. You can always go back and improve it later. But if it's really rough and there's big mud bogs and everything you have to go through, I would walk away from that property. Number two is power nearby. Now, we got lucky. There are communication towers up on the mountain here with a power line running from the main power source down at the bottom of the mountain all the way up to those towers. And it just happens to run right along our southern border of the property. And that allowed the power company to trench in a green box near the build site. And later we built our off-grid solar system. But in the beginning, when we were starting to first build the house, it made more financial sense just to tap into that power line so that we could get construction going and we didn't have to bear the burden of building the whole solar system, because we wanted to build it right. And we had so many different things that had to take place in order for us to build a terrace to put the ground mount array on. So this really simplified the building process and saved us an enormous amount of cost on the building of our solar project. So we decided to break our homestead building into two main phases. One was the access road, water, and the structure. And the second was the barn and the solar array. And if you're interested in how all that went, I'll leave a link here that talks about how we built our phase two, the barn and the solar system. I'll also link that below. Number three is trees. If you can find a well-treed lot, that's a major bonus, I think. I think trees are great. I love to look at them, and you can remove them fairly easily for, firewood, or if you need to clear an area. It's a lot easier to remove them than it is to plant them and wait for them to grow. But I wouldn't make it a deal breaker for you. We see a lot of much less expensive lots, especially in this area, where people will go out and successfully farm and homestead, and they've got tons of sun for their solar power systems without any trees especially during the winter solstice, creating shadows that are messing up their energy production. So even though it's nice to have, if you do have trees, you're probably gonna have to remove some of them to put your solar power system plus a large buffer around that so that you don't have the shadows during the winter. Number four is a big one. It's water. In this area, we have a huge underwater aquifer. It's like an underground lake that everyone, including Big Ag, has their straw down in. And so in order to control that, each area or watershed where the drainage comes down and gets into that aquifer has rationed water. And they call those water rights. And you can buy existing water rights. You can't create one out of thin air. You have to buy one that's already there. There are people that sell some of their water rights, and they've gotten quite expensive. I think when we moved in here, water rights were about $7,000 an acre foot, and now they're $20,000 to $30,000 an acre foot. but you can still get them, and the average household needs about a 1/4 acre foot of water. And in this area, the county won't let you build if you don't have at least a 1/4 acre water for a single family home. And if you're going to farm or you're going to have animals, here they call them animal units. Like a cow is an animal unit, and goats are multiples of an animal unit. So multiple goats make up a single animal unit. Each animal unit has to have a certain amount of water. So this is something you want to research. And if you've got a good realtor, they'll be able to walk you through this and really help you understand. Some places you don't need water rights, but you are going to need drilling rights. And generally speaking, almost anywhere you go, you're not going to be able to just stick a straw into a river or drill without some sort of permit or water rights. Number 5 is privacy. You cannot skip this step. I would recommend, before you even go out and walk a property, pull it up on Google Earth, and your realtor can help you find the coordinates if it doesn't have a street address, and look around and see what you can see from Google Earth, because there may be something just over a fence or over a knoll that could be something that would be a red flag and maybe a deal killer. I would definitely then, once you feel relatively certain that it's all clear and it's a good property without any of these nuisances around you, I would walk the entire property, look, listen, and smell, and check for your neighbors that might be creating noise, mess, traffic. And then remember also, even a great neighbor today may sell to someone later who could bring chaos tomorrow. In our case, we were fortunate enough that our neighbors were selling, and we were able to purchase the neighboring lots to be able to create a buffer zone around us to stave off any future development that could create headaches for us and perhaps ruin our experience here. So that gave us control over what's going on in our bordering lots. Not everybody can do that, but I would definitely at least recommend making sure that there's no big red flags before you get any further down the road with that particular property. Number 6 is the neighborhood. What kind of neighborhood are you getting yourself into? And the best way, again, is to ask your realtor for an address or coordinates so that you can Google Earth and zoom in and just look all around. And hopefully it's a more recent photo. And we're noticing that the photos seem to be updating on Google Earth more and more frequently. Look for a junkyard or some sort of industrial waste barrels laying around, for example. That could pollute your soil. You don't want industrial waste, and you don't really want to be near big ag, because there could be a lot of chemicals down in the aquifer that would ultimately contaminate your water. And you can look for the type of structures and sort of tell, is this a more upscale neighborhood, or are people there building nice barns and they have nice farms? I mean, you really want to try to get into a place that's got preferably people that are going to take care of the land, take care of the roads, and not be a nuisance. And I think that you can tell a lot just by scanning around on Google Earth. Number 7 is CC&Rs. That stands for covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I like CC&Rs, and I think that it protects me from potentially really bad neighbors. Unlike an HOA, CC&Rs do not police your life. They simply protect the neighborhood. They prevent junk accumulation, industrial activity, chemical storage, inoffensive uses. People parking old, ratty, broken down trailers on the side of the road, things like that you really don't want to have to look at all the time. And you also want to make sure that zoning allows for single family homes and wells in your area, and also make sure that permits can be issued where you're trying to build. So once you get clarity on all these legal matters and you feel good about it, that's the time you want to book an appointment to go out and walk the property. Number 8 is proximity to civilization. And we discussed this earlier in the video, where things have gotten a lot more expensive and you may have to go a little bit further out. I mean, we looked at gorgeous parcels that were more than an hour from the nearest town. We just felt like that would be exhausting every time we wanted to drive somewhere for a supply run. And for us, that wasn't ideal. So we wanted to be about 30 minutes from hardware stores, grocery, hospitals, fuel, and essential services. And if you have kids, consider schools, sports activities, social activities, and all of that driving that you're going to be doing on a daily basis can really wear you out if you're an hour and a half out from the closest services. So this is something to really sort of define early on, and then just don't entertain the properties that are out further, because believe me, you'll find some amazing, beautiful properties, but they might be an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes from the nearest services, and that's why they're affordable. But maybe if that's right for you, maybe that's a good play. But for a lot of us, especially doing your own maintenance and building, having to run to the hardware store every time you get ready to do a project, which is practically every day. It can be pretty exhausting if you have to go a long distance, especially if the roads aren't good. So just keep that in mind. Number 9 is the 10-mile rule. It's not an official rule. It's one that I made up, but we didn't want to be so close to a growing city that the suburban sprawl would eventually swallow us up. And we have seen over the 10 years since we bought the property that suburbia is coming this direction, but we still have considerable buffer. It's going to be many, many years before it gets all around us here. And again, we're kind of protected with the larger lots, neighbors, and our own properties from it. So we're not that intimidated by it. But staying at least 10 miles away from the nearest city limits, if you want long-term peace, is recommended. For us, the process began with making a clear decision that we wanted to get out of the city and buy some raw land. The next phase was where. And we knew that we wanted to be out of the state that we were in because we didn't like the politics in the state, and we think it's getting worse and will continue to get worse. So we wanted to go to a more friendly state, with lower taxes, and that had a lot of open land and a place where we could really, enjoy basically the rest of our lives, a place we wanted to put stakes down and build a long-lasting, multi-generational legacy in the form of a family homestead/ranch. And that's a big decision. So you've really got to think hard about what state you want to be in. And so we chose about 4 states, and it took a little while to sort of boil that down to one. I think we fell in love with Utah early on when we started coming here and going into the national parks. We started seeing remote homesteads, and then I started looking on Zillow, Land.com, and Realtor.com. When we reached out, we started just looking randomly at different realtors that were from this area. And I got to say, we got lucky. We found someone who has just been an enormous wealth of information about the culture, about the way that the water rights work here, understands the neighborhoods and the areas that we were looking at and where the problems might be with those areas. And she was very honest and straightforward. And frankly, we've bought other properties because we do commercial development, and she's our go-to person, and she's been fantastic for many years, and we've become friends. So having someone local in the area that you want to go to that can drive you around and just have real conversations with you is worth a lot. So I'd really encourage you to talk to several people on the phone until you find someone that you really like and that you have a nice, easy way of communicating with, and then just start the process with them. Now, yes, you're going to have to pay a realtor a commission. That's how they make money, of course, but it's worth every penny. You have to have a realtor. I would probably say shy away from buying direct, but look, if you're on a really tight budget and you cannot afford land and to pay a realtor, you can find people that are selling their land direct, and you might even be able to get someone that will do owner financing. So they'll let you move onto the land with a big deposit, and you sign a contract, and then you pay them directly and keep the bank out of it. So that's an option as well. But keep in mind that you've got to have your earnest money down. So when it's time to put the money down to do your due diligence, you've got the cash right there and ready, liquid, ready to go, because these 3 to 20 acre lots, they move really fast. And if there's a good one out there, someone's going to find it. If you don't grab it pretty quickly, it's going to go away. Now, I would recommend definitely taking your time enough to go out and walk the property and do all the things we talked about to make sure it's the right one. I don't really recommend buying the first property you look at unless it's just such an obvious banger that you just have to get it. But it's really better to look at multiples. I mean, we looked for, I don't know how many properties we looked at, multiple states, multiple counties, and then we narrowed it down to this area, and then we probably looked at 5 or 6 in this area before we settled on the one that we finally bought. So it is a long process, and you've got to be really patient, but you also have to be ready to move quickly. So let's talk about the hidden cost and unforeseen challenges. This is where most people, including us, get blindsided. So there's hidden costs that nobody warned you about, and they add up really quickly. So once you make an offer on a property, you'll enter into the due diligence window, and as soon as the contract is signed, the clock starts ticking. So don't waste time. You've got to immediately jump in and confirm the land is buildable and that the essentials are obtainable. So here's what I did. Number 1 is we got a land survey. This is $2,000 to $5,000, and you need to verify that the lot lines have physical markers, and they may already be there, they may not be there, but the surveyor will leave markers in those corners so you can walk out and see them. Later, you can then overlay the surveyed coordinates onto Google Earth to plan your build sites accurately. And this step is absolutely mandatory. I mean, I still have it today. I can go to Google Earth and just click on our coordinates, and you can see there's the perimeter lines around our lot, and you can see where we ended up building. But we did a lot of research. You can kind of turn and look at the land once you have accurate coordinates, but you want to make sure that the lot lines are where you think they are and that there's no legal issues or encumbrances. And so number one is the site survey. Number two is the perk test and soil reports. This is where an engineer will bring in a small backhoe and dig a pit in the ground where they're going to test the soil, somewhere around near where you're going to have your build site. And this is going to determine whether the soil can support a septic system and is structurally sound enough to support your home. We have certain types of clay here, even around this area, that are really dangerous, and you don't want to build on it because it expands and contracts and it'll ruin your foundation. So we want to avoid that. And a perk test is the way you do that. That's number two. Number three is well drilling estimates. In some areas, wells can cost up to $40,000 or more, and depths vary wildly. So you want to ask local drillers for quotes before you commit to buying that land, because they can tell you if the locals are drilling and can't find water in your area, that's a big problem. So you're going to want to just pass on that one. Number four is the grading of the area where you're going to build on, and is there a flat area for you to plant crops and have your animals and everything, and the road construction. So this is the first real expense after you purchase the raw land. You must build a legitimate access road with culverts and drainage ditches and road base and gravel, because without good roads, your construction equipment can't get in. You're going to have trucks that are going to get stuck. You're going to have floods that are going to wash out your road. So I really recommend building into your budget, getting the access road built properly. When we built this first 20 acres, we put a road in that was barely enough to get the construction up here. And we didn't really know at the time. I didn't really understand drainage, and it didn't have bar ditches. It did have a culvert. Now, the culvert's been fine and it works just fine. There's only one on our road. On other parts of our land, as we expanded, we had to build mini culverts. So I've got a lot of experience with finding out that one is needed and what happens when you don't have one. But for this particular one, we had a good culvert, but no bar ditches. And the turns were a little bit tight to get concrete trucks up here. So we ended up expanding it and basically redoing the whole road later, which was an additional expense that we should have just taken care of in the beginning and paid a little bit more and got it done correctly the first time. Number five is power line extensions. Now these can run anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, and depending on the distance and the terrain that they have to trench through. Now we paid around $20,000 10 years ago, and that was, a really good deal. And the power company does that for you. So they basically trench from the line that's existing along the property line here underneath to close to your build site. They'll put a green box in the ground, and then they're finished with that portion of it. And that can get very expensive. So if you're not going to build your solar right away, you need to know how much you're in for to get that box near your house. That could be a deal breaker. And we have neighbors here that had a very, very long run because they didn't have a power line right next to their house. So they had to go all the way down their whole property line because they wanted to build up near the back at a higher elevation. And it was a big expense, and it ended up having a big impact on their budget for their home. So definitely get your power line extension quotes right up front. The other alternative, if that's too expensive, is that now you know that you have to build your off-grid solar system right from the get-go as part of your initial build. And for us, again, we had two phases. That was phase two. We didn't want to build a smaller system and later expand it. We wanted to build the big one. So it was cheaper for us to go ahead and get electricity in the beginning and then wait 5 full years before we finally built our bigger solar array system so that we were able to go off-grid. And because we already tied to the grid, now we have that option if we want to go turn the grid on in an emergency, if there was ever a problem with our solar array, or if we have a really big storm coming that lasts for multiple days and we start running low on our batteries, we can always turn the grid on. And that's a nice feature. I know a lot of people are, they're off-grid purists and they don't like that idea. But believe me, if you can have grid tie and pay just a few dollars a month for a connection fee only, and you're not really using the power, I would go for it. Number 6 is internet limitations. I think today most of us can get Starlink. It's become pretty much globally available, but when we bought here, it wasn't. And so we ended up having to get a dish
set up where it's a sort of line of sight dish that goes across the valley to a tower. But as soon as Starlink became available, we did switch, and it's about $120 a month, and the speeds are quite a bit faster. To me, it's as fast as fiber optic. I cannot tell the difference between our old home that had fiber and Starlink way up here on this mountain. And Starlink, I have to say, I think is probably one of the better things that's happened to the off-grid community in the last 10 years. It's incredible. Number 7 is insurance restrictions. Many insurance companies do not like off-grid builds. So for us, connecting to the grid initially kind of helped avoid being red flagged in our construction financing process. So the way it worked for us was we did fund the construction via the banks. So you end up with a construction loan, you're paying the payments, and they're basically, you're releasing money. The bank holds the money, and then they release it to the construction company as they're building. So once the build is finished and you get your certificate of occupancy, then it converts to a mortgage. The insurance is mandatory because the bank isn't going to hold a property that is vulnerable to fire and could get wiped out and not have any recourse. So you're going to need to have insurance. And you want to make sure that you can get insurance. If you're in a FEMA flood zone or an area that's had lots of wildfires, you might not be able to get insured. That could significantly mess up your plans to build your homestead. So make sure you check that. A lot of people miss that one. Now, if you're able to self-finance, you can go without insurance, but you're assuming the full risk of fire, natural disaster, and even accidents. If someone comes onto your property, it's a liability. So I would recommend making sure you can get insurance. That's number 7. So if you're like us, you're going to do this in phases. Most of us can't just build this perfect homestead from having raw land to eventually having all these structures and barns and equipment houses and chickens and livestock areas and greenhouses and the whole lot. Most of us are going to start with just the very, very basics, and we're going to continue to build year after year after year. And eventually you end up with this amazing property, but you have to be really patient, and it does take a long, long time. But for the initial planning process, so you're going to dive in and buy the land, I would recommend planning the additional costs for a lot of these fees, water rights. You will have property taxes, hopefully very low because it's vacant land. Property taxes are usually very low on vacant land. Once you build, they're going to go up. But I would say probably add about 50%, somewhere between 50 to 100% of the land cost to get your access roads, your water, your drilling for your water, your grid tie, if you're going to do that, or your off-grid solar initially up front, if you're going to do it that way. But yeah, it's more than you think, and you're going to run out of money a lot faster than you think you're going to. So this does not include the house necessarily, the barn or the solar in our case. All of that was even separate from buying the land. So once we bought the land, we were able to get the land and the water rights, and then we sat on it for 3 years while we were looking for an architect and drawing up plans. We had started out with this idea we were going to build a container home, just a small little bug out family camping type thing. Turned into a pretty big house where we have lots of bedrooms for our family to come up here and visit. And I'm really glad that we went that route, but it did take a lot more planning and a lot more upfront capital. So we needed to save some money, and there was a lot going on. But the first thing is you got to secure the land. And usually you're going to want to secure the land and the water rights right up front. And then you can, do nothing. But remember, you have closing costs and you have other fees. You're going to have to potentially pay your realtor and any other ancillary costs that go along with that. And maybe even you can build in your road access to get up to where your build site's going to be. And then you just don't do anything. You don't build until you're ready to build. But at least you have your land locked down, and your annual expenses are fairly low. Like I said, property taxes aren't that expensive on raw land. So it doesn't cost that much once you have the land to maintain it until you're ready to build. This is really only the beginning, and I realized when I started making this video that I could probably do a whole series on this and share my screen and show you my workflow as I look through various properties, narrowing down certain areas and expanding out city borders, finding a perimeter around the city, locating properties, perusing those properties on Google Earth, and I'm happy to share that with you. Let me know down below if you'd like to see another follow-up video on this, or maybe even a series. And also, let me know what the biggest challenge has been for you if you're out there searching for land right now. I'd love to hear your story.
Well, thanks for hanging out today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. That really helps the channel a lot. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow along on our continuing journey in developing this off-grid homestead in southern Utah. We'll see you next time. you.